Good evening and welcome to the joint Select Board and School Committee meeting for October 4th. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, that's right. I was looking at the schedule. It's the 5th. And I want to welcome the Finance Committee. They're joining us this evening. And up here we have the Chair of the Finance Committee, Maury Garrett. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Before we start the presentation, we have a little bit of Select Board business we have to do, and that is we're trying to help a block party on Brittany Road. So I'm looking for a motion to close Brittany Road for the block party.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we close Brittany Road for a block party on October 16th.
Is there-
second that.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? All right, they're going to have their party. Thank you very much. So we have a presentation by Tom Mazza and Paul Pasturzik about where we are on the budget and prospects for this year.
Thank you. I'm briefly going to go over with Tom some FY, or the basic concepts, the basic thing we want to get at after tonight is the assumptions that I put together for FY18 and where that leaves us. But up until that point, I'm going to go over a few things. I want to make sure that everybody has a full understanding of how Proposition 2.5 works. I'm going to go over some of the Select Board policies and how those have affected the budget assumptions, and then finally I'm going to get into the actual numbers with regard to the FY18 projections. First of all, I just want to discuss very quickly Proposition 2.5 and make sure that people are aware that there are two constraints with Proposition 2.5. Everyone is certainly aware of the first one that is up there, that there is no more than a 2.5% increase above the prior year's levy limit when we're raising taxes from year to year. What sometimes goes unsaid or unnoticed is that second constraint, and it's one that the town of Long Meadow has began to discuss to a certain degree because we are closing in on that magical number, and that's a magic number of a $25 tax rate, less the capital or debt exclusions that are in place, or looking at it a different way, the levy ceiling at 2.5% of the taxable valuation in town. Again, our tax rate right now is, you can go to the next one. For FY16, you'll see down in that second to the last column, our tax rate for FY16 is $24.33. However, that $24.33 includes $1.86 that is attributable to debt exclusions, and our tax rate that would be attributable to the $25 mark is the $22.49 that is shown up on the board. If you look at the trend, however, you'll notice that it's going up by roughly 65 cents a year over the last couple of years. And if we stay on this trend, basically within 3 years, if nothing drastically changes, we will hit that magical $25 number in 3 years, like I said, if nothing actually changes. What I put up here are original estimates that were done over the last couple of days for the FY17 taxes and the FY17 numbers. First of all, again, the Proposition 2.5 calculation, you start with the last year's levy limit. You take your 2.5%. You add new growth to that, which I'm estimating at this point in time at $160,000. I realize that the assessors have just put in a number of paperwork requirements into the Department of Revenue. They have submitted a new growth number of 179,000 actually, so there will be a small bump in that number. And that gives you a subtotal, or what's known as the levy limit. And the levy limit added to that is the debt exclusion number. Currently, our debt service on excludable items is nearly $3.8 million. And that actually gives us a allowable levy limit. When we divide it by the estimated total taxable valuation of $1.9 million, it will give us an estimated tax rate for FY 2017 of $24.98. I'm happy to bring further information that I just learned about at 4:30 today that the values, and I just have a small value increase here from 1.965 to 1.72, and that's only about a 0.3% increase. The assessors have put in paperwork to the Department of Revenue that pushes our taxable valuation over $2 million. It would be billion, yes, I'm sorry, billion. And that would be about a 6% increase over the valuations from FY16. So while we all had anxiety looking down the road 3 to 5 years, hitting that magical $25 tax rate, if these numbers hold up and we maintain them over the next couple of years, that 3 to 5 year hitting the magical wall of $25 will actually be pushed off a couple more years. So it gives us some excess capacity and a little bit more wiggle room to work with going off into the future. It doesn't do anything for FY18, quite honestly. We can still only raise that first half of Proposition 2.5, that 2.5%, and those are in the projections. But like I said, it alleviates some of that long-term anxiety that we had, that 3 to 5 year projection hitting that magical wall. That is now pushed off a couple more years. So like I said, I literally learned about that around 4:30 this afternoon. Long Meadow has historically gone right up to the maximum allowable levy limit, and this is just some historical data over the last couple of years. There's an excess capacity amount in FY15 that was almost $19,000. What that is, that's really attributable to a rounding of the decimal points in the tax rate. We can't have a fraction of a penny. Therefore, we do lose some taxing capacity with their rounding capacity. Last year, we left about $42,000 on the table, or about 2 cents. Not a large amount of money, but we did not go to the maximum levy limit last year by a small amount. And historically, if you just scroll up a little, Tom, historically, over the last 30-something years, there's only been 6 years that we have not gone up to the levy limit, and those years are itemized for you. For the most part, there was a considerable amount in 1997. For the most part, there's some smaller monies that were left on the table, and the last one prior to FY16 was 1999. So again, from a historical perspective, the town of Long Meadow does go up to the tax rate limit. I know it is a goal of the Board of Select Board not to fully go up to that levy limit. However, there's always seems to be a need for it, and we continually just about get there every year. Here is just some historical data, again, with the tax rate and exclusions, the assessed values. As I said, that last number unestimated for FY 2017 is going to drastically change, where we had a point where I had originally estimated a 0.34% increase in taxable valuation. That number is 6.32% if it is approved by the Department of Revenue. And will, again, as I said, will certainly give us some wiggle room as we go off into the 2021, 22, 23 area if all holds up.
You've been doing about 10 million for the last couple of years. This would be like 28
Right,
million.
and actually, if you can go back, I mean, you can actually see the trend of what that growth, one more. You can actually see the trend of how small our growth rates were over the last 10 years. I mean, we're talking fractions, sometimes even going into the negative. With the exception of that 2.29, there was really minimal growth, fractions, and again, now for FY17, the assessors have been put in paperwork for a 6.32% increase. That is huge for us looking forward. Again, now this projection becomes a little bit outdated because it still has in the old projections, and basically this was the old projection where I was showing the town of Long Meadow hitting that magical $25 number for a tax rate somewhere in between FY21 or FY 2024, depending on the new growth in the town. I will update this number, and like I said, minimally it's going to push off that 2021 number into 2023 or so, and that 2024 number off a couple more years beyond. Again, this is already outdated from as of 4:30 this afternoon because of those new numbers, which is a good thing.
Paul, can I, what's the bottom half of
The bottom half is interjecting a 1% market rate growth.
Oh, okay.
Had again, market rate, instead of just the taxable valuation going up because of new growth, there was an additional market growth because of sales data. Just an assumption on my part, what would happen if that held true.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Historically, again, every year we get what is known as we get what is known as new growth, which becomes part of the FY, or become part of the Proposition 2.5 calculation. I'm just giving you some historical data of what those numbers are going over the last 10 years or so. They are relatively stable, with the exception of FY 2015, and that 2015 was the year that we had to do what is known as the 9-year measure and list, where we actually went out to every taxable resident in town and just looked at our maps, looked at the assessor's map, made sure that all the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, the dimensions of the house were all in line, the condition, and we did pick up a large amount of new growth because of corrections made in our data cards. But in the absence of that FY15 number, you can see that it ranges anywhere from, $130,000 low in 2013 to, $238,000 in 2011. Again, the estimate that I have built into the FY17 tax rate is $160,000. The assessors have put in for a new growth amount of $179,000. And then finally, again, it's just some historical data that I just wanted to show folks if they were interested. The bottom line is, if you go to that second last column under the heading I, we have it just shows how much we were eating up our revenue capacity when it came to the taxation. You can look at the last, say, 5 or so years. Again, in that second last column, where we had $10 million in excess capacity in 2013. We were gradually eating away at that, where we were down to $3.8 million estimated in FY17 originally, and we were chewing away at that about $1 million a year. Again, these numbers now need to be updated because of that valuation number that just came in. Moving forward, I just want to talk briefly about the FY18 assumptions and where I'm coming from when I make some of these assumptions. And I also want to just provide just some background as to where exactly our numbers are currently when it comes to reserves. The select board has a policy in place where they want to have the town's general reserves be anywhere between 5% and 10%. And by general reserves, I mean the combination of free cash and the operational stabilization fund, the sum of those two reserves, to be 5 to 10% of the operating revenues in town, again, as of July 1st. You can go to the next one. Again, it's an indication of financial strength. It's something that the bond rating agencies look for. Currently, the rating agencies think that we have a low amount of reserves for our grade of a AA2 when it comes to the bond rating. And I just wanted to show you up here what some of the reserves we do have in place, what they actually were as of a year ago, July 1st, 2015, as opposed to July 1st, 2016, for the fiscal year that we just started. Very briefly, from the top, our free cash was certified last week at $981,000, a slight decrease from where we were a year ago of $60,000. However, our operational stabilization fund jumped up $198,000 last year. Those were, I believe there were 2 appropriations made at town meeting, one in the fall of 2015. I believe there was a small amount also done in May of 2016 that transferred out of our free cash number and was put into the operational stabilization fund. The large increases are witnessed in water and sewer enterprise funds, and those funds historically had low reserves and was something that the select board as water and sewer commissioners addressed when they set the rates moving forward. We did have a dry year also, which greatly helped out the consumption, which when it helps out the consumption, it helps out the dollars that roll into the town. And there is also a pretty decent increase in our OPEB trust fund. OPEB standing for other post-employment benefits. The select board has a policy of putting aside money into that. It's a line item within the budget, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. But they do have a policy concerning that, and in FY 2016, we were able to put $247,000 away into that trust fund. The town's general reserves, as I said, are made up of 2 components in the middle of the sheet. It's the combination or the summation of the free cash and the operational stabilization fund. It shows the calculation there, where in FY15, our reserves as a percentage of our operating revenues were 6.43%. In FY17, they jumped slightly to 6.48%. I had originally anticipated that that number was going to go down, so it was pleasant to see that move minimally in the right direction. I did not believe originally that our free cash number was going to be $980,000, but we did quite a bit of sweeping of accounts, mainly capital accounts or special appropriations that were left or that were completed and or have not been used in a while. We did a pretty good sweep of those and closed out a considerable amount of money doing that. Again, as I said, when we look at those operating reserves, it is an indication from the bond rating agency that they do look at that, and there was a comment in our last Moody's rating, which was March of 2015, that they had a little section about what could make the rating go down, and the specific statement that they made within that rating narrative was reserves remain relatively stable, but below the national and state average for the rating category. So it's something of great concern, especially now when we're looking at doing a series of bondings potentially for a DPW, Council on Aging, and a new middle school all on the horizon, that we certainly don't want to see that number go in the opposite direction. We want to see that number move forward and go higher, just so we maintain minimally that AA2 rating.
Yeah, Paul, just as a reference, because we see this chart year after year, next time you put this together, can you put in the column that says target? And the target, I know for some of these is based on our budget or some other things, but it'll help us give a reference, especially for things like the enterprise funds that do have targets.
Yep.
Paul, as I look at these numbers, if we take them to percentages, so basically, right now, we're taxing like 97.36% of what we can charge for tax, right?
You're actually charging more like 99.99999%.
It's closer to 99, yeah.
Yeah, it's right to 100%. The maximum amount, you're basically at that level. Again, in FY16, you have $42,000 on the table.
Yeah.
Again, that's still 99.99% of what you could have when the tax.
Yeah.
The overall taxes are $48 million roughly.
So, I mean, I don't think we're at the point where they're going to redline Long Meadow, but it sounds like, if we don't have much wiggle room, and I don't know how good of investment we are. If we don't have, if a catastrophe happens, we can't raise any more money. I mean, some towns are probably at 75%, right?
Sure. Well, some towns have a lower tax rate and have greater excess capacity.
Yeah.
They may raise the maximum amount year by year, but they may have a lot of excess capacity where hitting that magical $25 tax rate number is far off into the future.
Right.
Where originally projected ours was 3 to 5 years away.
Yeah.
It will be bumped up a little bit, but yes, we have narrow wiggle room when it comes to taxing capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's really not comparable, but, one way for me to think about it is some towns would be like they have equity that they could always get more money from if they had to.
Sure.
And we have basically zero equity.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
is what you're saying.
There are obviously also there are some communities that don't even raise to the taxing capacity within the year to the levy limit. They're way below the levy limit also, where again we are raising nearly right to the levy limit almost annually, as I showed earlier.
But of course, sometimes when you have a lot of, when you're in a tight financial situation, everyone wants to loan you money, I guess. And they say you're a good borrower.
Well, and the other thing that Moody's had said was with regard to what could make the rating go down was an increased debt burden not mitigated by debt exclusion. So as long as our debt going off in the near future, our large debt, I'm not talking about $160,000 or $500,000, I'm talking about the millions and millions of dollars. As long as those numbers are overridden, I think we will easily maintain our AA2 rating. If we do not override those large amounts, obviously it has to be done within the taxing capacity. And I mean, really the significant thing, it's going to have a burden, it's going to put a burden and take away from the monies that's available from the operating revenue, because it has to be taken out of there. But again, like I said, those smaller amounts, we can handle internally. We have been handling them internally, some culverts, potentially the fire truck coming up we'll handle internally. Some smaller drainage projects, Woodside was handled internally within the confines of the Prop 2.5 limits and not outside of the debt, so.
Thank you.
Very quickly, when we start to build upon the FY18 numbers, again, talking about some of the select board's policies, they do have a capital policy where 2.5% of the operating revenues should be, and they have historically kept that to be set aside for capital items. Last year, this policy just went into place in it was done in FY15 and went into place for FY16. The rate did go up to 2.5 in FY16. We were not able to originally get it up in FY17 to 2.75, which is the second half of their goal, to raise it by 0.25% annually, as long as the revenues would be able to hold that. The select board was not able to do that during last May when the budget was completed. However, within the warrant that is prepared for the October town meeting, there is money projected to be utilized out of free cash in order to meet those select board goals, and get the FY17, get the select board challenges up to the goals that they had wanted. Anyway, and when we begin the projections for FY18, again, it's 2.75 that they were able to achieve in FY17. However, since they were done out of reserve, I've kept that 2.75 number in FY18 also. So I don't want to say it's level funded, but it would be near the same in percentage.
Could I ask you a question about that? So you had just said in the Moody's rating that free cash stabilization, what they were looking at as a potential, if they were ever going to downgrade us, it might be in that category. So the warrant article moves some of the money from free cash to capital, and capital is not part of that equation. So is that a concern doing that, or?
No, I wouldn't have a major concern doing that. Again, I mean, they're also going to want to make sure that the infrastructure is maintained and things of that nature too. It would be nice to move that into the Operational Stabilization Fund. There is also part of the warrant articles that were prepared, there is an additional amount to go into OPEB. Those are some of the other, that's another area where they are beginning to look at. And there's also a warrant article for a small amount, $30,000, to go into the Operational Stabilization Fund, which will boost it slightly. But to put the money in a capital reserve as opposed to into the Operational Stabilization Fund or leaving it into free cash, not really a major concern, because again, they're going to want to make sure that the infrastructure of the town is also maintained.
Thank you.
Yep.
When you say infrastructure, can you be a little bit more specific about that?
Well, we're talking about town buildings, sidewalks, streets,
Improvements to schools.
improvements to schools, right, buildings, I just, a general category. I believe within the article, or within the capital improvement plan, I believe it does give you a definition of what the capital budget is used for.
So the thing-
Roads, bridges, drainage, sidewalks, so on and so forth.
So the items that Moody's looks at first are what? Just so everybody's clear on that. It's you say free cash.
They look at a number of things. I don't know which one they look at first, but some of the things that they look at
The priorities.
are reserves. And again, our reserves are identified at this point in time as free cash and the Operational Stabilization Fund. They look at our tax collections. Are we collecting what we're billing? We have a pretty decent tax collection rate. Usually by the end of the fiscal year, we've collected 99% of what we billed. Usually within a year or so after that, it's either put into tax titles and we'll get it back eventually, but to have that type of tax collection is pretty important. They look at policies that are in place. They look at adherence to policies. Also.
Financial policy.
Financial policies. They look at our ability They'll also look at things like new growth, because they'll look at our ability to grow. They will look at the complexion of the taxable valuation, where the town of Long Meadow is 95% residential. They would certainly like to see a better mix of residential and commercial. That is one of our biggest deterrents in not achieving a AAA rating. That's one of the things, again, we do not have the diversified tax base that they would like to see.
I would imagine that's pretty common in a lot of small towns across the state, especially in the Western Mass area.
Especially in the Western Mass area, but, going out east.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah.
It is different. They have, you could even look at East Long Meadow.
Yep.
Certainly they have a very much diversified tax base as opposed to Long Meadow. So those are some of the things that they go in and look at.
That's helpful, thanks.
Okay. And then next, the selectmen have one other policy that affects the numbers going into FY18, and that is the money that is set aside for the other post-employment benefits. Basically, we're talking about health insurance for those in a retirement status. There is a liability on our books right now. It's about $33 or $34 million that we would owe in benefits for those retirees or those future retirees, that the town picks up 50% of their health insurance until basically they pass away. So again, you have a number of years that we have a liability that they're not working for the town anymore, but we still owe them or have some liability on our books concerning that. And currently, again, that number is about a $34 million liability. But this policy, again, it was revised a little over a year ago. The policy originally was 0.25% of our property tax revenue, not operating revenues in total, but just the property tax revenue. That number we were able to bump up in FY16 to 0.5%. It's about I think that number equated to about $244,000 at the 0.5%. And the goal was in FY17 to bring that up to 0.75%. Originally in May, that goal was not met by the select board. Again, there is money to be appropriated at town meeting in order to make that goal of the select board for FY17 whole. But again, this money is for all former town employees, all town retirees, school or town, to pay their, basically it's all health insurance related. There is additional information on this, on what our liability is, towards the end of the handouts. I think it's 3 pages from the end. It will show what our liabilities are. And it shows we also have an OPEB trust fund where this money goes in. Currently, we have about, I think it's about 3% that we have against our total liability. We have money being appropriated in FY17. That number will jump to 4%. But again, these are small jumps and probably better off than most communities putting this money aside. We are doing something in that regard. It would be very devastating for us to try to meet the actuarial study or the actuarial amounts that are required to meet the OPEB requirement. We'd be talking about another $1 million going into that trust fund. But we are making small steps in getting money set aside for that. Moving forward into the FY18 projections, using that as some of the background.
Excuse me, Paul?
Yes.
Maury here, Chair of the Finance Committee. I just had 2 questions. I wanted to recognize the members of my committee here, Mark Borowski, Dr. Andrew Lamb, Richard Lagasse, and Ed Clark. When you mentioned the 99.99% capacity that we're meeting each year, we wanted to know how that compares to similarly situated, socioeconomically situated towns in Massachusetts that are under that same statutory requirement. In other words, do we know how we compare in terms of getting towards that capacity with other similarly situated towns?
I do not have that information, Maury. I imagine because of our residential complexion that we might be a little bit worse off than those that have room to grow. I'm not sure, again, how the communities are, how many of them are built out per se, like the town of Long Meadow is, and I'm just not sure of that comparison with what their what their diversity is in their tax base.
Did you say about hitting our tax limit, the cap limit, the 25 per thousand, like how we compare other towns? I understand that question.
Well, no, not exactly. Not how we compare to other towns in Massachusetts, because, as he properly identified, towns in Massachusetts are very different. What we're specifically getting at is the towns that are similarly situated, towns that are, that look like us, that are, have the same kinds of needs, the same kind of capacities, the same kinds of residential business makeups that we have. How do we compare to those towns? And so the first question was, do we know that? And then the second would have been, well, how do we match up? But if we don't know the answer to that, then
Well, the other thing I would offer is that we do retain the title of highest tax rate in the Commonwealth. So that puts us in the front of the line for every community if you look at it from that perspective.
Just don't know how far second place is.
Yeah, we just don't know where second place is and who it is.
No
so.
looking back.
Well, the last numbers that I've seen look like Greenfield, they're not that far behind. Greenfield, Maynard, Ashburnham, Shutesbury, all in the 22 range, so.
Well, what's hard to determine when you look at the state databases is we have a number of $24.33 for FY16 as our tax rate, and that's what they're going by. But what we don't know out of that $24.33, or we know what Long Meadow has, is there's $1.86 or so of that is debt excluded. So that really drops our number when we compare it to the $25 amount. I mean, we should be comparing $22.49 to the $25 tax rate. Again, it's just hard to determine without getting into some nitty-gritty and how much they have excluded like we do or not excluded. We don't really know where we stand. All that tells us is that in the combination of everything, we have the highest tax rate. Again, that's a combination of what is counted towards the $25 levy limit and what is debt excluded.
But the other complicating factor also, though, is new growth, because
Sure.
you can raise your tax revenue through new growth without, in fact, having to increase your tax rate. And so some communities that have open space or have availability of new growth, even though they may seem that they have a high tax rate, can actually do a different projection of income versus Longmeadow, because they don't come up against the tax levy limit. In fact, they may only need to raise their tax rate, 0.5% or 1%, and yet they can raise their revenue multiple percents by getting it from new growth. And that's the difference between Longmeadow and many of the others. So, Maury, I think your question is what communities are like that. You've got to look at communities also that, what's, as Paul said, not only what's their revenue, what's their tax rate, but what's their potential new growth. And that makes us pretty unique. We have a fully built-out community, and I'm not sure of too many others that are like that.
Or assessed or assessed values too. What's the overall assessed value of the community? Because that's the denominator in the equation.
And this is not going to be helpful in the context, but I know that Richard was working on, Richard Foster was compiling that list of communities from a demographic perspective. Has he shared? Do you know? Did he share that with you?
I have not seen
Okay.
it.
But I know that was something that Richard was working on before the reorg.
Given again, what the assessors had submitted to the Department of Revenue for FY17 values, I mean, we may not hold that distinction of being the highest. The projection that I have right now, and forget what was on there because it was, didn't have the assessors' revised numbers, but I have our tax rate estimated as the levy limit being $21.75. $1.82 will be added to that for debt exclusions. Our tax rate will actually come down from the $24.33 that it's in FY16. It should come down to about $23.57 in FY17 because of that increase in the values. Now, let's not get confused. Your tax bills are relatively going to be the same because your values are going up. So, I don't want to give anybody false hopes that something like that. But and people will be affected differently because their values may go up 10 or 15%, where somebody's may not increase at all. So, but overall, taking the global position, again, our tax rate will probably come down from $24.33 down to $23.57. Fairly substantial drop.
And Paul, when do we do triennial revaluation? So, this is 2016 evaluation going into effect 2017, but 2019, there's going to be another evaluation.
Right. This is the third year that we're in before we do a reval. So this is basically based upon calendar year 2015 sales data. These revised estimated taxable valuations. We will actually do a complete revaluation. Will be more comprehensive and not only take into sales data but other factors in FY18. We will begin that in the latter part of FY17, but that will be in effect for when we do the tax rate a year from now.
Paul, when does the shops come into effect? And that we'll start seeing the flow of income?
I'm going to have to assume those will come into effect in the biggest portion will come into effect in FY18.
Okay, thank you.
Or later. I mean, it gets triggered when it gets a certificate of occupancy, right?
So if it's done in calendar 16, that would be relatively for 18, so, which I think some of them are expected to open next month, if I recall correctly from the paper, so. We could see a bump. Again, we're not talking about an astronomical number, if I recall correctly. I thought the number when they were going through and talking to town meeting was roughly $80,000 in taxes. It's a nice bump, don't get me wrong, but it's not the cure-all for some of these numbers I'm going to show you very shortly. Anyway, moving forward, I've looked at this from a comparison point of view from where our new revenues are in FY18. The changes from FY17 to what we have in place in FY17, going through and projecting the warrant articles that are going to be voted on at the special town meeting. Our increase in Proposition 2.5, that's our main revenue stream, is expected to go up a little over $1.1 million for FY18. I normally put in a very low conservative number for new growth. You'll see that I have it in at $125,000. We will have a small decrease in the debt exclusion number, not even worth talking about really, $250,000. That gives us an increase in taxes of $1.26 million. We are expecting state aid from the full-day kindergarten to be increased in FY18 of $100,000. That would come through the Chapter 70 line item. However, when we project forward, we have a number of things that have now been taken out of free cash that would not be anticipated to be taken out of free cash in FY18. And those things are, again, what I had alluded to earlier, some of the select board's policies that were not met originally last May. Those total $350,100. The itemization is in the lower right-hand corner. We used $100,000 to balance the tax rate in May. Again, the operating budget. We have a warrant article for $127,500 to go to the capital funding to meet our 2.75% goal that was originally in place in FY17. And we are also anticipating to vote upon putting another $122,600 into the OPEB trust fund, again, to meet the goal that was originally set up in FY17 by the select board. So those, because they're coming out of reserves, we're not anticipating monies to be taken out of reserves in FY18, so that's a decrease in our revenue stream. I put in a decrease of the $48,000. That is the parking monies that the school committee has put aside for the DPW to maintain some of the parking lot. If you folks have it in FY18, great, but I'm not anticipating that. So I'm backing that out. It's a small chunk comparatively when we look at the whole numbers. And then there's a minor decrease in other sources of $922,000. But when we net all that together, we're going to have a net, I'm estimating that we have a net increase in our revenues for FY18 as compared to 17 of $962,000. On the expense side, making a number of assumptions, we've increased salaries at the school level, increased salaries at the town level. Your collective bargaining agreements are in place. The town has 2 collective bargaining agreements relatively in place. Most of them call for a 2% cost of living increase or 2% increase in wages, coupled with movements, what are known as step increases that are built into those collective bargaining agreements. We're anticipating a 3.5% growth rate in salaries for both the school and the town. On the school side, it's going to amount to relatively over $900,000, and on the town side, almost $300,000. Those are just, again, the start of the needs that we have for FY18. I've estimated a 7.5% increase in health insurance. That amount would be $314,000. Whether that materializes or not is unknown. Health insurance rates are increasing fairly dramatically based upon prescription drug costs. That is the biggest factor in the health insurance rates. There was just a vote of the Scantic Valley Board yesterday regarding Medicare or the retiree rates, and the composite almost there was about an 8% increase for the retirees, which will go into effect in January. I believe our composite rate when we went in FY17 for employees was in the 8 to 9% area. And previous to that, we had 2 zeros. So we were fortunate, but it did kind of catch up with us. Scantic Valley remains strong. However, and I will say that Scantic Valley is subsidizing the rates because of the reserves that they do have. However, their reserves are dwindling also. Again, towards the last part of some of the handouts that I gave you balance sheets from the Scantic Valley group in FY15 comparable to FY16, and it shows the use of their reserves also. But that 7.5% increase in the health insurance amounts to about $314,000. I've estimated an 8% increase in the Hampden County retirement assessment that we get. That 8% is based upon the actuarial studies that they have, and that 8% increase is projected to go off into the near future for the next 5 or 6 years. They may have another actuarial study done in a number of 2 to 3 years, but that is the projection of their most recent actuarial study. Those are the big ticket items. I'm also anticipating an increase of about $30,000 in our liability insurance. Our workers' comp ratings have over the last couple of years have skyrocketed. I shouldn't say skyrocketed, but they jumped substantially, and mainly because our experience modification, when we have a number of claims and the insurance is paying out more than the premiums, when that goes greater than a 1.0 point, we get an additional assessment charged to us, and we're in that for FY17. We went over that 1.00 experience modification, so we're getting hit a little bit harder in that area. Other benefits, basically it's the Medicare amount. When our wages go up, the town has to contribute 1.45% towards Medicare for each of the employees. That's roughly what that $17,000 is comprised of. The OPEB contribution for next year, it should only be about $10,000 higher. Again, as I said before, what we're going through in the fall town meeting is we're taking free cash to hit the selectmen's goals, the percentages that they have set aside, and I am not increasing those percentages moving forward into FY18. I am keeping them at the levels now that the 17 goals were met, but because they had to come out of reserves, I don't want to create more of havoc than we have. So there's only a $10,000 increase in the OPEB contribution, and the same holds true with capital. We're putting money aside in capital. The select board's goal of that 2.75% of operating revenues would have been met in FY17. I am locking in on that 2.75% again because it had to be done through reserves. That amounts to about $79,000, and we have about $34,000 easily that I can anticipate in reductions. But those uses total $1.8 million, $1.86 million, and when you take away the additional sources that we have from the uses, you can see that we basically have a gap of about $900,000 at this point in time. Again, these numbers are conservative. We've been in this predicament before. I don't think we've ever been as high as this number in the future, or have been in the past. But again, that's kind of the starting point that I've determined at this point in time. It will be softened up a little bit by that, and the $20,000 in new growth will come in. The numbers will also increase and move forward, but again, not anything significant to make a significant dent into that $900,000. Lastly, I just looked at the numbers and basically made some conclusions on my own as to a potential distribution of these numbers. We have what I'm going to define as non-discretionary uses, and I've done 2 scenarios. Certainly, when it comes to the non-discretionary uses, we have to pay health insurance. We're going to have to pay our retirement assessment, and this is on the left-hand side. We're going to have to pay the increased liability insurance, and we're going to have to pay the other amounts for employee benefits. On the right-hand side, I made 2 other assumptions about non-discretionary uses, and that is the increase in capital, and that is the OPEB contribution. Again, both of those are directly related to the select board policies. But now when we take and again, I'll go back to the left-hand column, taking the additional sources that were projected for FY18 of $962,000, taking out the non-discretionary uses of nearly $600,000, it really leaves a pot of $372,000 to be distributed for the so-called discretionary accounts. Discretionary accounts being, the operating budgets of the school department and the town, less things like debt service and employee benefits. On the left-hand side, it's a little bit different because of the assumption regarding capital contributions in the OPEB. And then finally, towards the bottom, I just tried to give percentages as to what the operating budget looks like for FY17. As you will see, debt service is estimated at $4 million. Employee benefits at 8.5. The school number from the general fund is $33 million, $33.1 million, and then the other operating budgets on the town side, $12.3 million. When I carry the school number and the town number over to the right-hand column, I'm taking the $33.1 million of the school budget and the $12.3 million of the non-school budget, and I'm applying percentages. We're saying, so what I'm trying to portray here is of the discretionary uses, the school department at this point in time for FY, basically based upon the FY17 numbers, is about 73%, and the town side is roughly 27%. When I try to divide those numbers from available for discretionary uses, the numbers above, the 372,000 or the 283, you can see there's not much left over going into the budget projections for FY18 and into the different, whether you call it school or non-school components of the budget. It's less than 1% at the best scenario of the $372,000, $373,000 being divided. So basically after that, and there's nothing more as far as what's being projected, but I did give you a couple of other things. Just some history on the town's OPEB liability. As I mentioned, our current actuarial study has us an unfunded liability of almost $33 million. We currently have $1.157 million in our trust fund. We have 3.52% funded at OPEB liability. Again, that number will increase in FY17. The next component is, again, I mentioned earlier, the balance sheet of the Scantic Valley Health Trust, FY15 to FY16. And you will see that in FY16, the trust lost about $1.8 million, again, through high usage amounts, some catastrophic cases within the trust. I will say that number has been softened somewhat recently by what's known as reinsurance and money coming back into the trust that just arrived in September. But they still took a big hit of, probably close to $1.3 million in FY16. The next page is just a page out of the actuarial study of the Hampden County retirement system, and it basically shows how much the system is going to increase their needed contributions over the next couple of years. And again, that's where I got the 8% number from in the last column there. And then finally, I just provided some information on the retirement system again, and the actuarial determined unfunded liability of the system and what Long Meadow's portion is. And unfortunately, it's a very high number of nearly $50 million. The good thing about that number, it is on a schedule to be repaid by the year 2035. So there is a portion of our assessment already going towards funding that unfunded liability. So at that point, this is all that I have to say at this point in time. I don't know, Tom, you want to add anything regarding the school budget or anything of that nature?
The only thing I can add is the school budget includes not only the funds that are authorized at the annual town meeting, which would be reflected on our FY17 budget document as the general fund or the top line. The school committee also includes other revenue sources, grants and special revenues. We make assumptions regarding how much we may receive in awards or collect in fees. So we include those every year. For FY 18, I would say at this point we would most likely level fund all of those sources unless there's some news that we receive in regards to funding from either the federal or state level in regards to the source of those various revenue sources.
Do we have that page?
I don't, but I can send it out to you. It's also available on the school department's website.
Okay.
You just
Pour
completely
more
numbed.
water on your money tree, Paul.
As I said,
I fertilize it.
just the
Well, I thought I gave you
overwhelming
some
data
good
just
news.
numbed everybody. Good
Yeah,
job.
I thought I gave you some good news in between there. I should have saved it for the finale.
Yeah, we're not going off the cliff for another year or
Right,
two
we got
more than we
time, we got
thought.
time.
Yeah, good.
So, I got a question on the Regional Retirement Board, and I know you've told me this before, and I don't remember. Our percentage depends on how big our salaries are, right? So it's not number of people, it's every time we give out increases, then our percentage will
Right.
increase depending on how everyone else
It's
is.
based upon what I would define as our participating payroll. So that is the total of the salaries that the deductions are taken out of.
And the participating salaries are,
Basically, your base wage, longevity, and things of that nature. The biggest thing that is not included in the salaries are overtime amounts.
no, but I'm saying which employees? Aren't there a group of employees that are not
You
included?
basically have all the non-school employees, and you have I don't want to say a good portion, but you have a number of school employees, your custodial staff, maybe some of your special ed assistants, and a few others. The school probably comprises still about 30 to 35% of that total assessment. It used to be well into the 40s when the school lunch program was internal, but once that was privatized, that number was coming off. But I'll have to look at the exact proportion, but I'm still guessing it's going to be between 30 and 35% is directly related to the school department.
In regards to the healthcare, it's all the employees.
That's all employees, inclusive of the teachers, yes. And that, again, it's probably a 70-30 kind of split in that area.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, the elephant in the room here is clearly, how do we make a change? And although for the coming year, fiscal year 2018, next year, it's going to be very hard to impact something. The trends are pretty obvious, and they're not getting any better. And the big ticket items are the things that we just sit back and, Paul, that you put on the top of your list as non-discretionary uses. And I want to challenge that, and I'm not going to challenge it for 2018 because we can't, but I think beyond 2018, many of those do need to be challenged, and I'm going to be the bad guy here, and I'll give you an example, and one is pensions. We currently have our employees, and I realize I'm talking to employees here, have our employees participate in what's called a defined benefits plan, which means that they get a percentage of their final year's salary, times years of service or based on a formula. Sometime out in the future, when we don't know what their salary is going to be and we're trying to put away money for them today. And most private industry has moved to what's called a defined contribution plan, which is for every year you work, a certain amount of money is put away. You know what the liability is, and you put it away, and hopefully it grows. And if it grows, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And the question is, when will the town of Longmeadow, and I understand the state implications because there are implications with state and state legislatures and requirements, but when are we going to start looking at that so that maybe new employees go on a different plan? Because this is totally unsustainable. It's going to get a lot worse, and unless we make a change, we're going to be running a town that only provides health benefits to our retirees and pensions to our retirees, and a couple of the other big-ticket items. So I think the challenge for the select board, and I'll tell you that I'm not here to negotiate public negotiations, but, 8 years ago or 9 years ago, when I started on the select board, we met with the school committee and we said, when we go into our negotiations for our contracts, here's what we got to do jointly to try to approach some of these things. And we have not done that. And so we sit here and say, whatever the benefits are, and we're just going to sit back and say, okay, now all the things we really want to do as a town, we've got to stop doing, because here's all the things we seem contractually required to do. And the fact is, today we're contractually required to do them, but we might not be in the next cycle. And if we want to make more money available for the things we want to do, and I'm not downgrading the value of our employees, I'm just saying that in the 21st century, defined benefits plans are very, very rare and far between. Maybe not for municipal employment, but maybe they ought to be. And I think if we're going to take an approach, one of the things we do is look at those items. I mean, Paul and I have been going to the Hamilton County Retirement Board board meetings. That's another issue where, certainly retirement plans are one, the percentage of medical insurance we pay for retirees, and how that we pay for, retirees when they turn 65, and what percentage we still pay for. And unlike most private insurers or private, when you turn 65, it's here you go Medicare. We're not there. We're partially Medicare, but not totally. So there's a lot of things we ought to challenge, and they're not going to be challenged for 2018. I get it. So I'm not attacking what you've written here, Paul, but we're going to be here 3 years from now, and our successors are going to be here 10 years from now with a much bigger hole if somebody doesn't do something.
I would say, Mark, if you're serious about challenging those, that you not wait until the new numbers come out, because these are legislative changes that have to be made and are probably not going to be easy to change. Yeah, so that's why, if you really are serious about it, you're best probably to start now as opposed to waiting, because it's going to take years.
Kind of
to
a
get
call
those.
to action here. I mean, we've got 12 elected members here who all have a common concern of we're literally spending, I don't know what the number is, 60% or something of all of our new growth on statutory, what you're calling non-discretionary uses. It's crazy.
No, I appreciate you going to the retirement board meetings with Paul. I think it sort of opened your eyes a little bit, and I appreciate your feedback. And I'm wondering, Paul, I mean, there was probably a point where, all this money would go to the retirement board, they would invest it wisely, and it would sort of help the towns. I mean, now it looks like they're charging us 8% interest. I mean, was there a point in the past where the retirement board really was helpful to towns in terms of planning for pensions?
Well, I would assume just about every pensioner would say they've been very helpful to me.
Yeah.
What you're referring to is probably their rate of return.
Yeah.
That, we are all putting in money in the rate of return, but that is like anybody's portfolio over the last 10 years or so. It took a big hit 6 or 7 years ago, and it took a hit in between. The last couple of years have been good. However, the money is not even invested at the Hamilton County level anymore. There was a movement to put it over to the PRIT fund, which is managed by the state. And it's done by professionals. But again, I think it's like anybody's portfolio. It's not earning the 7, 8, 9, 10% on a regular basis that it may have been in the past, and it's more volatile where they're taking a loss every now and then in a year, and then maybe they're making 7 or 8%. So overall, it's not doing the type of rate of return that they had anticipated. Part of the last actuarial studies, they actually lowered their expected rate of return. It's still fairly high. It's 7.75, maybe 7.875. It's in that vicinity, which is, I think everybody in this room would like to be having that rate of return on money that they currently have.
But they're not, because in fact, last year, their return was 0.32% or 0.34%.
Well, their actual return.
Their actual return.
Their target is still
They're
up.
saying, we're making the assumption, we're sending projections based on, it was almost 8%, now it's 7.75 or something like
Right.
that. When their actual was 0.34 0.35% return, and more importantly, you're right, Paul, they now take the money and put it in PRIT. You know, and the problem for me is that on top of that, they've got a secondary layer of management. So PRIT takes a management fee, and then Hampden County takes a management fee out of it. And at some point, the town of Longmeadow may want to say, you know, is this dual system in our best interest thing? And I don't know if you do it, and it's a whole lot of clearly, you know, we come out with a huge liability if we did. But, you know, they're getting literally 0.3, when I saw the 0.34%, you were sitting next to me, I mean, this is the most ridiculous thing in the world for last year when everybody else was reporting reasonable returns.
Well, again, it's the long-term rates, and they do what is a smoothing, and if they have prior year losses, it goes into a 5-year weighted average, and that, you know, that might have something to do with the actual return, too, that they put in there.
So there's a lot of challenges. Yeah.
But there's a lot of
Any-
opportunities, Mark.
Russ?
Yeah, I think, I wasn't here for what you were just referring to in negotiating, but really the negotiation would be retiree insurance, health insurance percentages, not necessarily the pensions, really. So is that what you're suggesting, that we would?
Yeah, Russ, it could potentially all be, you know, it's all needs to be negotiated. I mean, none of it can be imposed. And for the most part, as you know, you pay up front for concessions that you get from a union, but, you know, long term, you know, it's unsustainable. And I think at some point, people recognize that.
I
Yeah,
think it's
I mean-
worth it to look to see what other towns are doing in negotiations in regards to benefits.
Yeah.
I heard that out east, some towns are bringing that in, especially the OPEB, because people are concerned that their retiree health insurance won't be there. But how that would be worked out, I don't know. We'd have to see other models.
So,
Yeah, it's really town-driven is, I guess, what I was going to drive at is, we're just a department, so if that's something the board decided to do, we certainly would have to weigh in on it, but that's, you know, you'd be
But
driving that.
are you suggesting, Russ, that the select board can come and say to the school committee, here's where the town wants to go, you need to negotiate that and work that into your, because we don't negotiate with the
Well,
teachers.
No,
Let's talk about
typically,
policies.
typically
Yeah.
what happens is a town or city will decide, you know, as a city, we want to change from 90-10 to 80-20 on insurance. The city councilors or the board of selectmen come to the school committee and say, because you're the only other department that's independent, we want you to be on board with this, you need to go negotiate with your unions. And then typically, the school committee's in a position where we either say yes or no to that. And typically, committees will say yes, but it's something that comes from the board to us, because we can't drive that, you know, that's, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of it or not, I just.
That's fine.
You know.
Michael?
well, I was just going to say that, you know, we've kind of been dancing around the same conversation for probably at least 2 or 3 bargaining cycles. And Mark, you yourself have been a proponent of trying to make these big coordinated asks, and yet throughout this entire, you know, the entire time that we've been negotiating, you know, that since you brought that up, or since it's been brought up, we've yet to be approached by the board to make those asks in our bargaining. You know, we've yet to have any sort of coordination in terms of how we reform our pension liabilities, how we reform our healthcare liabilities. So if this is something that you're serious about, then, you know, I would suggest that we use this opportunity to come up with somewhat of a strategic plan, and whether we do that, you know, through our, if we're legally able to enter an executive session to talk about those strategies, you know, whatever. But I would say that at this point, rather than us, you know, kind of say these are the things we need to do, we should identify the things we should do, figure out where they're mutually beneficial, and, you know, and then go for it. Instead of spending 6 more years talking about ways we can reduce our liabilities and, you know, cut costs.
Jessica, that might be another good joint meeting, is once we start coming up with a plan, sitting down and looking over what that really can be done with the health insurance and pensions and the options. So maybe we'll work on figuring out what
Yeah,
the
I mean,
next
and you guys
meeting
can do it
on
at the
that.
admin level.
We can
Yeah.
start there, yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, we actually probably about 4 or 5 years ago, sat down through the special legislation that was granted,
Yeah.
where we introduced deductible plans, where we did not have deductibles before. It did save some money on the premiums, and that was done jointly with the collective bargaining groups, including the school teachers association, all the other units. And I will also say that on the agenda for the Scantic Valley Board, moving forward into FY18, they are looking at doing that same thing, because it was all based upon what the state medical insurance plan looked like, the GIC, that we could raise our deductible up to their levels according to the statute. Now, we have a $250 individual, I think it's 500 or maybe 500 family plan deductible. Since that time, and that was what the GIC was 3 or 4 years ago. Since that time, the GIC has raised theirs, so there is some opportunity to go back, do that same type of bargaining, and potentially save a few dollars there. The Scantic Valley Board or the other part of that is also looking at the percentage contributions that we did not change through that process the last time. We kept the same percentage contributions, and that would be, again, could also be done through that bargaining legislation. The other thing that the Scantic Valley Group is doing is looking at health savings accounts, potentially, which would have some impact on the premiums, large deductible accounts with some type of health savings contribution by the town to contribute to those large deductible plans. They are looking at that. That's something that may, have to be negotiated also, but it's something that's on the radar screen of the Scantic Valley Group also.
Well, the beauty, Paul, of healthcare is that it's shared, and so that, if the town saves $1, our employees save $1
Right.
for the, for the most part. So there's an advantage to both parties to find solutions to
Sure.
healthcare costs. Retirements is a little bit different.
Right.
It's all on the town.
And the health savings accounts are portable too. So should
right.
people leave, it travels with them, whatever contributions that they
Right.
still have remaining in their account. So there are benefits to it. Like I said, they're high deductible accounts, and, those people who are needy of constant health services would probably not going to be beneficial for them, but for those others, it could save us a couple dollars, and they'll have money set aside, hopefully, and if something does happen to them, they will have money in their account to take care of their initial needs.
There any questions on the assumptions? When the very beginning of this, there was, that Paul put together, or anything, and you want him to work up to bring back to us?
I do, yeah. One thing I did want to mention, though, is the Mass Teachers Retirement System, which is the bulk of, our higher paid employees, is separate from the town's pension. So that's, we're not paying towards that. So your assumptions, if we go back, I guess it's a page before that. I guess at the end of the day, you're projecting negative $900,000 approximately, the 898. And at the top, you have the $350,000 use of reserves.
Right.
So that's obviously, I guess, we're back to the policy issue, which I understand. We're trying to get back to that number and using reserves to do it. And then the following, under uses, what you're showing is essentially the increase in the property taxes. You need another 10 grand to stay at that number this
Right.
coming year. And same thing with capital, the 79,000?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So the negative 900 is including 350 of that really policy decision, but it's coming from reserves this time.
It's
as
coming
opposed to-
from reserves in FY17, operating revenues in FY18 is the projection.
Yeah. Okay, so the 900,000 in that page, then the next page we go to, you're showing essentially 272,000. Are you saying that that's, instead of 932,000 that you have for contracted salary increases for the school, for example, is that what you're projecting that we would actually receive from the town is 272?
Correct.
Okay. So the other, I guess
Large sum of money.
$600,000 or so, we would need to come up with somewhere in our budget. Is that basically where you're?
Or big cuts, one or the other.
Okay. And I don't know, I guess I gotta look through this more. I mean, I just got this today, so I'm gonna look through it more carefully, but a large piece of this deficit really is the 350, a third of it at least. more than a third.
And the change that you said, the 6% growth, that doesn't really change anything on these
It
assumptions?
does not
'cause
change
that's-
anything for FY18 other than increase our taxing capacity if we wanted to have an override.
Okay.
It would increase that, or it would push off that $25 levy capacity that we've been talking about in 2021 roughly. It's going to push that out to 2023 or 24 once I do the projection out. It's again, it alleviates some long-term anxiety.
Well, I know this is a lot for us to be taking in this first blush, but if anyone comes up with any questions later. Yeah.
So I guess I wanted to throw out a suggestion to build on Mark's point, and Russ also offered on it. The school committee and the select board, I think, do have a few joint policies. There's an MOA on IT, for example, but there aren't a lot of crossover policy documents. But because minimally the health insurance is a shared problem, perhaps a joint policy on, identifying efforts to lower those costs, and pension costs long-term, would be something that we could, work on together. Maybe a subgroup could get put together. Because I think the big thing is, a lot of times to make those changes, you have to capitalize them with the employees up front. You basically have to, especially with the collective bargaining environment, and is a fairly pro-labor climate in Massachusetts, to make these changes, you have to large part bargain them, and employees don't. By and large, we have very good employees, and they don't want to take a pay cut for coming to work every day and doing their best. So if there are favorable projections on revenue, a policy of setting aside a certain amount, like OPEB or capital, to finance implementing some of these desired changes would be something I think both groups could look at as a way to approach this. That would be my suggestion.
Is there any changes you want him to do in the way of charts of changing the projections on the 6% on that first one? I know he said all of that had changed, or
Can we get 900
we
to
need to
0?
concentrate on is that
Sure.
one page with the assumptions.
We have the spreadsheet right here, we
Yeah,
can change it.
that's done.
So if there's any requests for more information, just send it out to us, Paul.
One of the challenges, Paul, and thank you so much for putting this together and for all of the information. Challenges for us as a school committee is coming into a meeting like this cold is really tough. I don't know if you all had an opportunity to review any of these
No.
documents, but
No.
if there's any way next year, we might be able to review it, even if it's a day before, or just to have a little bit of a window.
Sure.
I think the discussion would be a little more robust and meaningful if we had a better handle on the figures.
I think we meet administratively on the 21st.
Yeah.
So if you get your committee concerns on that time, maybe we can have
Yeah.
another dialogue on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. Russ?
So, just doing the quick math. Well, one thing is the projections there show salary increases, but we also have, utilities, all the other things that go up every year. So that's
Right.
the amount minimally we need for salaries, but not any other increases we have essentially. But even just assuming that number, we're looking at $660,000 that we would have to try and cut from the school budget. And I know last year we were kind of arguing about 50,000 one way or the other. I will say, I think that's going to be a challenge to look at a number like that. It's not your proposal or anything like that, but 660,000 based on, even cutting that middle school team, that was 250,000. And that was 4 teachers. So I know this is just preliminary, but from my perspective, it would be, I think we need a lot more conversation. And I guess the question for the two chairs is really, what's the plan to continue this conversation? 'Cause I know last year, we never really we ended up kind of pushing everything to a small window to try and get the budget done. And I'm not sure how we're looking at doing this year.
What happened last year? There was a meeting in September, the first joint meeting, and
We-
then what was the follow-up?
We
Was there
ended
a
up
second-
having.
The bodies went back to their corners and came out swinging at the bell, essentially. And I think,
So
um,
when was the next joint meeting?
I don't know if I think it was later on when we started realizing that the budget was
In the spring.
was heading, in the springtime. And I think to your point, one of the reasons, the point of this meeting is and has been a presentation of information versus a discussion of information. And that's when Paul develops the information and we kind of present it tonight. To both sides at the same time. I think Tom and I are probably the only other two people who saw it in advance.
Probably only this afternoon.
Yeah, this afternoon as well. So it really is, here's the data, and we don't really expect a robust conversation. The whole point of it is, so the school committee and the select board can now start thinking about their budget process and their budget goals, having the exact same information starting from literally the same page. And so there's no ambiguity about where the starting point is or where the end point needs to be based on current projections.
Right, but what makes that difficult is if we are saying, let's just give this information to you cold and let's not have a robust discussion. I think we want to go more in the direction of having the information earlier, having a more robust discussion, so we're not going to our corners and, having these back and forth sort of dialogues. I think that it's more ideal to aim for that scenario.
Well, I think what we're
A
really.
substantive discussion.
Right. I think this is sort of like the presentation of material. It's a moving target at this point in time. You're going to see these numbers
Absolutely.
and the assumptions.
Yep.
When you sit down, I'm sure with
Yep.
Marty and Tom, they're going to tell you where there's some wiggle room on your budget. We're going to see where we got some movement or we don't have movement on our budget. So I think it's worth it to share that information as we go along every time we get it.
Right.
One of the first things we're going to do as a group is sit down and look at our goals.
Right.
What are our goals for this budget? I'm sure you're going to look for your goals for this upcoming year.
Right.
And so we would like to share those goals, and so you'll understand where we're heading towards it. And as I said, another joint meeting on where we're going with the policies and giving information back and forth. We won't have an idea of where we're going with our budget until we really start to get a presentation from our town manager. And so there will be discussions. We're not going to wait till the last minute, but we still are waiting for our capital plan to come in. We have to decide what our goals are this year. He's going to tell us some of the changes that that's coming from Paul's, and all through that period of time, we'll be sharing that with you. But we wouldn't be ready to negotiate because we don't even know what our goals and what
Oh,
we're
I
going
wasn't,
with
no,
it,
I
yeah.
wasn't suggesting a negotiation, simply the ability to have a discussion.
Yeah.
Because as I said, it's a lot of
Yeah, it is
dense
a lot.
information.
And there's going to be more information to share.
One thing,
Thank you.
that I wanted to mention, the reason that the Finance Committee, and again, appreciate so much you inviting, is we talked about getting this budget cold, and that was exactly the experience that we had with all the controversies that
Yeah.
were being dealt with and the going into the neutral corners.
Right.
Last year, we essentially were presented at the last minute with a finished product that our primary understanding of was that the fight has been had and this is what the parties have begrudgingly agreed to. And at that point, there was very little opportunity for the Finance Committee to do anything productive other than to accept the result of the discussions that we weren't a part of, that we didn't really know anything about, because we knew that it was not, it was questionable whether it was going to be in the interest of the town to essentially instigate a giant fight in the town meeting by refusing to endorse the budget that had been negotiated. And so when you're talking about the joint meetings and the discussions going forward, I just wanted to to present the idea to you that we would, we're happy to come to this meeting. It's been very enlightening. It's going to be very helpful for us for our meeting tomorrow and our meetings going forward. If we can be included in particularly these types of joint discussions, so that when we sit down and make a preparation to make a recommendation to the members of town meeting about the budget, that we can actually confidently speak intelligently about what it is we're actually recommending and why, and that we understand the process and the and sessions and negotiations and so forth that that led to that product.
Yeah.
Marie? Oh, excuse me. If I could, I'd like to put on my Richard Foster hat. He can't be here tonight, only because, you know, if Rich were here, I think he'd certainly have something to say about the need to make sure that our budget includes not just funds for operations, but funds for the long-term, you know, security of the town. And I don't mean safety security, I mean financial security. And when you look at that, the issues of OPEB, of pension liability, and of capital planning also are important, and it really becomes a four-legged stool, with clearly the biggest leg is operating the budget and running the town. But to do that to the exclusion of saying, you know, and last year I was right in there saying we'll defer the OPEB funding and we'll defer capital, and we did that on a one-year agreement. But we said if there's free cash, that's where we're going to come back and restore it. And you know, that's why I tried to lead this goal of having the special fall town meeting coming up, restore those funds, because to have a budget that can operate, but you're defaulting on your medical benefits or your long-term pension liabilities, or the town is literally falling apart because there's been no capital investment, is not the balance that we're elected to do. So I just want everybody to keep in mind that, you know, as easy as it seems to, let's cut out OPEB and let's cut out the pension money and let's cut out our capital spending, I think there's got to be a balance.
No, I don't think, I think everybody here tonight has great appreciation and respect for all of the issues and the understanding of the pressure on towns like Longmeadow. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of factors that we maybe can't change in this moment, a lot of things we can look to change. But, you know, from a school committee standpoint, we're looking at a product, and what kind of product are we providing, and how much further can we scrape, and think about putting money away, but compromising the quality of education we're providing in the schools. And again, I'm not posing this as any sort of negotiation in any way. It's just a very challenging situation, because I know that the select board cares just as much about the quality of education as the school committee does. So
I think with town meeting coming up, though, the issue is let's assume it gets passed at town meeting, and then later in the year, which I think should happen earlier rather than later this time, we're still going to be talking about the policy decisions versus how much does each side cut, really, based on this, because both sides would have to cut something. But when you cut, you're going to have unemployment costs, and there's associated costs with doing that too. So I think what we need to do is talk together earlier and try to come up with something that's mutually beneficial for everybody, because it's one town. I mean, it's not like, you know, I know a lot of times it's like school and town, what are we doing? But at the end of the day, we all live here, and the schools are important to me, but so is DPW and police and
Right.
fire. It's not.
Right.
So
Well, we
Rest, the question I would have, and this isn't directly to you, but in general, is, you know, Paul started out the presentation here talking about the levy limit, $25 levy limit. If that weren't looming, and clearly the revaluation gives us some breathing room, would we be sitting here talking about something else? Would we be talking about a 2.5 override, which also, if you do, isn't a debt exclusion, but it allows you to move up more than the amount of that we just get by 2.5%. I mean, you know, that's a tough decision. I'm not sure the town's people would approve and vote for a 2.5 override, but if that's you know, if that's what it takes to do this, then we need to start talking about it sooner rather than later.
Well, I think before we even start that, we all have to go to our corners and work on our budgets and decide where we want to go with our goals. But we do have a short window, and the short window is the budget is coming out in January. Is that when you're looking? When do you usually have our budget schedule? It's-
Budget calendar should be coming out within the next couple of weeks.
Well, I
Yeah.
think if the selectmen.
We already did a preliminary, I think it was
Right,
the end of
we
January.
did a preliminary, but one of the next meeting, should be on the next meeting for you folks is, are there changes to the assumptions based upon this? And then we'll make the changes and write those out into the budget assumptions. They'll get out in the early part of November.
Yeah.
And then the budgets would actually be due, for the most part, on the town side, they're due in early January, late December, and then your budget, you know, I'm sure there'll be some preliminary numbers, but you folks approve it in the early part of February.
So we could, at the joint administrative, look at the calendar and get an idea of where we can share communications and where we're standing on our budgets. So there's more communication during the year.
And I'd like to ask about the DPW project. I believe your committee went on record in support of what the Special Task Force, or whatever they were called, recommended. Where are you going to get the money for that?
The
A debt well,
debt
eventually
exclusion.
it'll be a debt exclusion vote.
That would be at town meeting,
Yeah.
not town meeting, at ballot.
Yeah, it'd be just exactly like the high school, John. It would be a town meeting would approve it by 2/3 majority
And
to
a
put it on
referendum vote.
for a referendum vote
Okay,
at
but
the
one that's
local
coming up
election.
is not the decisive town meeting.
Correct. It is not, that is correct.
The funding doesn't get obligated
So
at the
it'll
town
be
meeting.
probably at the May town meeting?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Or if not, yeah, I mean, we're working on that schedule as well, but it would just, like I said, essentially fall, it's a little different because the school projects are all governed by the MSBA, but essentially town meeting vote and then referendum vote at the ballot box.
But will there be a bond to pay for the property?
And the debt exclusion will be the vote will be to authorize the bonding, but that debt exclusion, the reason why it's excluded is it doesn't count against our tax limitation.
Yeah. What about ancillary costs?
It would be all built in. You mean like architecture and engineering,
Yeah.
like soft costs, it's all built in.
Okay. So you think we'll have something we can deal with,
Mhm.
manageable? Okay. All right, no, good.
But
I hope so.
Any other questions for Paul or Tom? Tom, could we have that sent electronically to us and make sure it's distributed to, especially
Thank
the
you.
select board members who's going to be here?
Forward out to us.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and I think we're going to plan some future one of these.
Yep, I
For the year.
think we should just decide before we leave, if the finance committee's interested, I think what we should do is we'll go back. And thank you so much for sharing that, by the way, because it's just very helpful to communicate. We can plan a joint meeting when we meet and choose a date, and we'll include you in that email so we can all be sitting around the table. I think that would be our next goal. Is everybody comfortable with that as a next step plan?
Well, let's
In
find
terms
what
of-
the agenda is too, and
Well, I
where
think
we're going.
I think the agenda would be to continue discussing the budget projections, basically, and to continue the conversation. A question would just be timing in terms of, Tom and Paul, where that would fall. Were you, Stephen?
We can work, I think, we meet in our joint admin meeting, we can look at some dates and look at the budget calendar and figure out what's a good plug-in time, because we want to do it soon enough where
Right.
you guys aren't up against the deadline for your
Yeah.
budget as well. The only thing and this is kind of an editorial comment, and I know we're trying to close the meeting, but because I wanted to address the finance committee, because I'm relatively new to town, and I have noticed that the finance committee is in a tough spot to advise town meeting, which is its role. I mean, the town meeting members are appointed jointly by the finance director and the moderator, so finance committee is supposed to advise town meeting, and how does the finance committee advise on the numbers if they weren't involved in the discussions? And so, for the finance committee to say, hey, it shouldn't be $10,000 that line item, it should be $8,000. How do you make those judgments? And one of the things I've been thinking about, especially with last year's budget process that got challenging, I I think the finance committee's, what I would look at the finance committee as a town meeting vote would be, how was the process? Was the process that was followed thoughtful? Did people pay attention to the budget directives and to overall cost? Did we try and take a balanced approach towards to preparing the budget so one function didn't get an overwhelming preference over another function? And I think having you guys here throughout the process will, obviously give you a bird's eye view of that. But that's what I think, and I want to know that for myself. Is the budget that the town manager's budget sort of out of balance? And I think that's the thing that I'd like the finance committee's role to be. So when we go to town meeting, finance committee can say to town meeting, we're not going to discuss, how much electricity is going to be in FY18, but we do know that both committees, tried really hard to make this work and made fiscally sound decisions, something like that.
Okay, so we'll let you know when Jessica and I put our poll together and figure out when we can make the next one. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good
Motion to
evening.
adjourn?
Yeah, is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah. Yes?
I was told by Beverly in the building department that I need to be here to have approval for Dr. Brooks' sign.
Oh, it's next door.
She told me A15.
And the planning board moved next door. They're still in there.
Oh, good.
I
A12.
hope you enjoyed our meeting.
Sorry.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Do we have to have two motions or one? Okay, there we go. All those in favor? Okay. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I